Just for the benefit of those of you who were not here yesterday, I am going to tell you a little bit about Mark. So he is a pastor, writer, and teacher based in the UK. He has over 25 years of cross-cultural ministry experience, including 4 years in Uganda and 2 decades with the Langham Partnership. His doctoral work in cultural apologetics at Covenant Seminary explored how the arts can open people to the transcendent. And he's passionate about exploring life, theology, and the arts. And you'll see on his slides, he's put where he writes about that on Meynell.net. So I recommend you check that out. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. That was easy. If that's all you got to do. It's very nice to see everybody here and to see like the population double overnight. It's clever. How big is it going to be tomorrow? Yeah, no, probably not that big. Anyway, it's as I said yesterday, I'm just absolutely delighted to be here, and I've already had a really happy time, and getting to know people and finding that even though we've never met or had paths that have crossed in the past, it's amazing how quickly, particularly in a sort of environment conference like this, where you make connections very fast, because we're here for very similar reasons, even if we are not necessarily makers ourselves, or we have different spheres or things that obsess or interest us. Actually, under Christ and his lordship, there are so many ways in which actually we can find connections as well that you don't always get in church circles. So this kind of thing is a very precious thing indeed. And I'm involved in a similar conference. We've been going for about 6-7 years in the UK. And I feel very at home. It feels like we are very much on the same kind of wavelength. Very briefly, so yesterday I was exploring different ways in which the arts and artists, by which I mean creative people in all kinds of spheres and realms. There needs to be another word in English, certainly maybe there is in your mother tongue, but that seems to encapsulate and cover all kinds of art forms. But anyway, just for ease now, when I say artist, I mean every conceivable means and platform, as it were, medium. There are things that artists have through natural ability, skill, training, application. I mean, you can have all the skill and natural talent in the world, but if you don't apply yourself and actually slog at it and sweat blood and tears over it, then you're not going to have anything to show for it. Again, also it includes all kinds of things like opportunity and circumstance, and it may be that there are incredibly creative people, but they are entirely caged, a bit like the goldfinch in a way, and unable to meet their potential. And there are all kinds of other issues to do with that, political and social and so on. You don't need me to talk about that. But leave all that aside, all these different sort of attributes. What is it about artists that sets them apart? Not that they're better, not that they're more special. There isn't an elitism here. I think sometimes arts conferences can generate a very unhelpful kind of self-introversion obsession that we are a cut above. No, that's not what we mean at all. But there is something going on that is unusual. That's what I'm trying to get at. What is it about artists? And it seems to me that it's at least 2 things, on top of all the skills, education, blah, blah, blah. It's that they see stuff nobody else sees, and then they can communicate what they see. But their means of communication is incredibly varied. It may be that they are rubbish at words, but they can do extraordinary things with splodges of paint, or harmonies, or bricks, or whatever it is, that their language is not the language of words. But here's the extraordinary thing. Sometimes actually the raw material of an artist might be words, but they do things with words that nobody else dreamt of, or actually even perplex other people who use words on a normal basis in the shops or whatever. Sometimes artists break words, push language to its breaking point, and then do things with it that is completely extraordinary and new and so on. But in essence, what's going on is they're seeing and then they're communicating what they see. But one of the other things I mentioned yesterday, and we don't necessarily think about this very much, and I didn't develop it at all, but maybe it's something over the weekend to sort of have conversations about. Artists see and they communicate what they see, but they don't always know what it means. In fact, invariably, they don't know what it means. Sometimes it takes others to say, hey, do you realize what you've made? That actually it resonates in this way that the artist could never have conceived. And so actually, we're not talking about the lone genius in his or her garret sort of sweating and suffering for their art and basically cut off from society. No, actually, there is a role for the critic in its neutral sense, not someone who just rubbishes stuff. The critic who can interpret what has been made and say, this is why this taps in. Or maybe it's something that has been made that is way ahead of its time, and for whatever reason, the world isn't ready for it. It took me to middle age for me to begin to appreciate Beethoven's late quartets. These quartets he wrote when he was completely deaf. There were points when he was suicidal at this gigantic creative force of a man, a difficult man, but an extraordinary man, who basically his lifeblood was music, and now it's gone. And there are stories of him with his ears to the floorboards, desperately trying to pick up some sound waves from what is being resonating in the building. Desperate to get something. And then he writes these late quartets, and some other, the Ninth Symphony, one of the most famous things, he was completely deaf, so he never heard it. But the quartets, string quartet, is a kind of ultimate distillation of music. Just 4 string players, that's it. That are difficult. You don't just sort of whack them on and chill out with your pina colada or whatever it is. This is not chill-out beach music at all. It's difficult music, and when you first hear it, even if you're really familiar with classical music, you don't get it. You really have to invest in it to get it, and you think, this man never heard what he'd made, but it was all in his head, and it would take generations to get it, because it's like there's a sort of deep inner humanity and rage and agony and despair and force. I'm someone who's battled with depression for 20 years, and there have been times when something like one of the late quartets, or one of my other heroes I'm going to talk about in a bit is Shostakovich. Again, some of his quartets, one of his quartets he wrote when he was suicidal. Somehow that captures something that nothing else I know on earth can do. Anyway, they're seeing something, they're communicating something, but they don't necessarily know what it means. But we're in this together, and it's out there, and it's a gift. It's a generous gift to the world. And I praise God for that. Who cares whether they're Christian or not? Shostakovich was asked, do you believe in God? He said, no, but I'm sad about that. Of course, growing up in the Soviet Union. He had many friends who were believers, Jewish and Christian. I love the honesty of his reply, don't you? No, but I'm sad about that. But God gives this to the world through these extraordinary people. So I started at the easy place yesterday with people who literally see, and that we can literally see what they've made. So the visual artists, and then moved to the verbal, the poetic. Today, I want to talk about music that helps us see, which is so counterintuitive and doesn't make any sense. But actually, the reality is musicians do help us see. I did mention yesterday I've got a lot of dead white European males, so I'm just going to give you some more. Why not? Start as you mean to go on. One of my heroes, musical heroes, a chap called Ralph Vaughan Williams, just a couple of years ago was the 150th anniversary of his birth. He was Charles Darwin's great-nephew, which is interesting. And he declared that he was an absolute atheist when he was a teenager. And then as an adult, he would call himself an agnostic. And yet the amazing thing is, he couldn't get away from Christian stuff. And he edited the greatest hymn book in my context, and I'm an ordained minister in the Church of England, for better, for worse. When in the days when there were hymn books, he was commissioned to edit what became the English hymnal. If you've seen it, it's green, but musically, it is the best. And he wrote loads of hymn tunes for old poems and things, that, some of which I still absolutely adore. And he spent his whole life writing religious music. It's really interesting. There's so much more going on. But as Lindsay mentioned, in my doctoral research, I'm really interested in how the arts expose people to the transcendent. And what is so strange is that Vaughan Williams got that. Here he was, coming from this deeply secular materialist worldview, and he would talk about Uncle Charlie, that is Charles Darwin, getting up to all kinds of fun and games. But he had a very odd thing. There was a girls' boarding school in East Anglia, in the east of England, in Norfolk, which is where my parents live. And this girls' boarding school that had no connection with Vaughan Williams whatsoever, I guess one of the sort of senior people at the school was a sort of music lover or something, wrote to him and said, "We want to name one of our girls' boarding houses after you." Okay, that's cool, nice, yeah. Well, I mean, what do you say? You don't say no. And so it was all a bit odd, but he thought, okay, well, I suppose I better write and something and say thank you. I mean, has anyone else here got a boarding house named after them? I don't. I'm not quite sure what I'd say, but hey, cool. And so he writes this essay about what music is, but he pictures it at teenagers. So this is years ago. And he said some extraordinary things in this essay. And I want to just quote a little bit. He said, "Music will enable you to see past facts to the very essence of things in a way which science cannot do." Nudge, nudge, Uncle Charlie. "The arts are the means by which we can look through the magic casements and see what lies beyond." Casement, old-fashioned word. It's, in fact, there are some in the buildings here. Sash windows. Sash windows are awesome when they work and a complete pain when they don't. But the idea about a sash window is you have a casement, basically as a whole sort of contraption that holds it in with pulleys weighted so that it moves up and down smoothly. And basically he's saying that music helps you see through the magic casements, as if basically we are living in a world that's mediated through these windows. And we can see what lies beyond, to see the invisible, which is paradoxical, of course. To see the invisible. But what's really crazy here is that he's saying the audible helps you see the invisible. I mean, that's paradox on paradox. How on earth can sound help you see? Doesn't make any sense. Now, I want to start by playing a short extract of, one of his more famous pieces. I don't know whether if you're into classical music or not, that this is from a piece that was premiered in 1910, so 4 years before the First World War, and it's called Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis. Thomas Tallis was the greatest English composer during the sort of Reformation era. He was so great that he survived the religious turmoil of Henry VIII, then Edward VI, then Mary, then Elizabeth. Basically, you had to bend in the wind if you wanted to live. And Tallis And what's so interesting, you can listen to Talas's music. If you listen to it chronologically, from what you're listening to, you can tell who's on the throne. Because sometimes it's in English, sometimes it's in Latin, sometimes it's a wall of sound, sometimes you can hear every syllable. So if you're sort of hyper-Protestant, you want absolutely every syllable because the word is what counts, you see. So one of his most beautiful crafted little jewels is a short anthem called If Ye Love Me, Keep Thy Commandments. And it is perfection in choral writing because you can hear everything. And then one of his other masterpieces is Spem in Alium, it's Latin, I have my hope in no other God but you, O Lord. And it's for 40 parts, 8 choirs of 5 parts each. I've sung in it, it's mad. And you cannot hear a single word in that at all, but the whole point is that it's just like a world of sound that you are utterly lost in and immersed in, but you're lost in wonder, love and praise. And it's amazing. Obviously, that was not when Edward VI was on the throne. Anyway, he was a genius, but very much of his time, and then sort of afterwards was basically the kind of composer that only those who are sort of really into it know. So he's not a well-known figure, but he was one of Vaughan Williams's heroes. Vaughan Williams loved doing deep dives in folk music and sort of the heritage. And he and his friend Gustav Holst, who wrote The Planets, they would go round the country just writing down, getting people in the farms and the pubs and the fields and whatever to sing the folk songs. And they would just notate them and write down the words, because basically they were just passed down orally. Nothing was ever written down. And the sort of post-Second World War folk music revival in Europe and North America and elsewhere, but folk music as a sort of kind of Bob Dylan before he went electric and all this sort of stuff, that is largely the legacy of people like Vaughan Williams and Gustav Holst, who basically wrote it all down. Simon and Garfunkel sing Scarborough Fair. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Well, that was one of the songs that was just passed down. Nobody knew about it. It was just sung. These guys write it down, and then we have it. So there's a folk music library in London, thousands of songs written down by these guys that would have been just lost to the wind. So Vaughan Williams was obsessed with a sort of musical heritage. And he writes this piece, 1910. I'm not going to say any more. I'm just going to play you a bit. But before, oh no, I am going to say something more. I'm going to say something more. Now, okay, here's the problem modern generations have with classical music. Do you know what the problem is? Movies. I love movies. But the main filter through which people listen to classical music now is film scores. Not a problem, it's not a complaint, it's just a fact. But what that means is that whenever you hear something that's orchestral, your mind is immediately sort of filled with the cinematic. John Williams, amazing melodist, complete thief. He uses all the techniques in the book from 20th century music. I can hear Vaughan Williams in a lot of John Williams. I can hear Prokofiev, I can hear Shostakovich, I can hear Elgar. These guys, John Williams, absolute sort of scholar of music and orchestral writing. It's all there. You can hear the planets, Gustav Holst's planets in the Star Wars, the Empire theme, the Darth Vader theme. That is straight out of Gustav Holst's Mars from the Planet Suite. Not the melodies. John Williams is uniquely brilliant at that. But the textures and the moods and the menace, that's straight out of Holst. Anyway, I'm doing what I always do, just going off on one. Okay, so there's nothing I can do about that, and we kind of have to embrace it. When I play this, even if you don't know it, you will see some kind of cinematic landscape. And that's okay. But in 1910, you wouldn't have done. But all kinds of other things would have been going on. So, here we go. Let's hope this works. The whole thing is about, depending on how fast you go, about 16, 18 minutes, so that's just a little snippet. It's very interestingly scored. It is for a string orchestra, plus a smaller string orchestra, plus a string quartet. And it was written and first performed in Gloucester Cathedral, which is an old, huge medieval space. And the second orchestra and the quartet were placed in different places around the building. And so the idea is that you've got sort of echoes coming from a gallery that you can't see. And you are immersed, but you don't know where these sounds are coming from. It's a very sort of magical thing and incredibly difficult to perform. Now, usually today, when there are performances, they will use CCTV so that everybody can see the conductor. Heaven knows how they did it in 1910, but anyway. Just impressions from that. I mean, how many people knew it? Anybody? A handful? 2 or 3? Okay, in a way, it's helped that you didn't. What do you see, if anything? Journeys? Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, there's something, you're setting out on something or you're going somewhere. I don't know if anybody saw hobbits knocking around. Howard Shore, who writes the score for all the Lord of the Rings films, very influenced by a handful of composers, including Vaughan Williams and Wagner and Prokofiev and co. There's a lot going on, but there's a lot of Middle Earth in that. 40 years before they were written, the books, of course. What else did you see or sense, feel? Yeah? Say again, sorry? A river, okay. Now, so the image of the river is very interesting, is it? Because there's something organic about it that kind of has a life of its own. You don't know where it's going to go. So, Vaughan Williams, the interesting thing is, okay, so the melody that you first hear in the bass is dee, 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 dee. That's an old hymn tune by Tallis. So it starts life as a hymn tune from the 1600s. And Vaughan Williams loved Tallis's hymn tunes. But what he does with it could not have been written before 1900. He breaks all kinds of musical rules and does stuff that basically, if he presented this, at the Royal College of Music for his finals, he would have failed. But that's the great thing. You can do that if you're a composer. You just do what you do. It's like being an artist. You just do it. And there are harmonies, there are fluctuations, there are things that he does that are wrong, and yet it works. Any other thought? Yeah? To which emotions? Peter. Huh. Oh. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess I don't know whether you were reading that passage recently or something, but no, that's interesting. And that's fascinating, worth doing sort of deep dive into what's going on there. But you're mentioning of an emotional journey, that is the crucial thing. And even if it's internal or it's physical or it's a trek or it's a kind of psychiatrist couch, whatever, there is a progression here. And at its roots, that's what music is doing. And it's one of the most extraordinary mysteries. And it doesn't matter what music. It could be, a deep, long-standing, inherited, indigenous music that is passed from generation to generation in a place that has deep, deep roots. Or it could be somebody who's gone to music college and studied this, and he taught composition for years at the Royal College in London. So very, very sort of educated and refined and stuff. But basically, music only works if it takes you on some kind of journey. But here's the thing. It is the most abstract art form there is. What is music? Now, if it has texts, it's a kind of bridge to the less abstract. And I'm going to play you some text set to music in a second. But when it's without text, it is the most abstract thing I think human beings can make. And yet, here's the extraordinary thing. Not only do we begin to see things, but we are taken somewhere in ways in which even the composer won't understand, and certainly won't necessarily intend. They are expressing stuff not in order to do something, but because it's there, and that's got to come out somehow. So this was a very interesting thing. This was a critic who heard the premiere in 1910, writing that week. So sometimes critics really nail it. Sometimes critics are a nightmare, but this was a music critic who really gets it. This is 1910, who said this: throughout its course, as in the piece of music, one is never quite sure whether one is listening to something very old or very new. But that is just what makes this fantasia such a delight to listen to. It cannot be assigned to a time or to a school, but it is full of the visions, there's that word again, visions that have haunted the seers of all times. The English word seer or prophet is literally a seer, someone who sees. And here is this abstract sound that is helping people have visions. That is so mysterious and uncanny and weird in the true sense of the word weird. In Old English, weird means sort of kind of ghostly and sort of sinister and transcendent. Witches and wizards are weird. It doesn't mean they're odd, it means that they are in touch with things that go beyond the immanent. I want to talk about a composer who's alive, and I've had the honour of meeting. He was one of the people I got to interview in my thesis. James Macmillan, Scottish composer, deeply devout Catholic, and has written all kinds of things. He's one of those composers that can write anything. He's written full, massive orchestral stuff. He's written choral stuff, tiny little songs, all kinds of stuff. He wrote an amazing percussion concerto for Evelyn Glennie. Has anyone heard of Evelyn Glennie? She's a Scottish percussionist who's profoundly deaf. And she's had all kinds of pieces of music. She plays barefoot because that's how she hears. And she's at the top of her game. And Macmillan writes a percussion concerto. So a concerto is where you have a soloist and an orchestra, and it's designed to show off. But the concerto is called Veni, Veni, Emmanuel. It's the Advent hymn, Come, Come, God with us. And basically it starts in chaos, and then bits of it's like watching footage of glass exploding reverse. So things are sort of coming together, and basically by the end of the piece you are hearing the whole theme, Veni, Veni, Emmanuel. But at the beginning it sounds like cacophony and noise. And Evelyn Glennie is playing all, she'll have a whole array of xylophones, timpanis, drums, snares, everything. And it's just absolutely extraordinary. James Macmillan wrote a little book called A Life in Music. So it's basically why he's a musician. He says this: music gives you the power to look into the abyss as well as to the transcendent heights. It can trigger the most severe and conflicting extremes of feeling, and it is in these dark and dingy places where the soul is probably closest to its source, where it has its relationship with God. It is in those places that music can spark life that has long lain dormant. This abstract thing helps you to see the invisible. So So I want to play you a short choral piece he wrote. He lives just outside Glasgow. The University of Strathclyde is the second university in Glasgow. And a very long-standing friend of his is the Catholic chaplain at Strathclyde University. And so over the years, Macmillan has written little choral pieces for the choir in the Catholic chapel. So it's semi-professional. I mean, they're students. And there's a whole range they're called the Strathclyde motets now. The Clyde River is the river that flows through Glasgow. And basically this is a piece called O Radiant Dawn, and it takes an ancient medieval text for Advent. And the text is very old, but beautifully incorporates some key verses from Isaiah, which are traditionally used in Advent liturgy, because the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And I've got a video of it, so we can, and it's a remarkable little group of singers, 5 singers who've known each other for a long time. They sing this completely unaccompanied, and their intonation is just pitch perfect, but so is their articulation of the words. It's truly astonishing. But what I want you to try and listen out for is here you have the marriage of words and music in which the sum is so much greater than already great parts. So the text is beautiful, but it kind of does even more.
Slay
Isn't that a jewel? Did you notice he does very subtle things? He doesn't change the text, but the one word he repeats is the key word, come, because that's what Advent is all about. We remember the first coming in order to remember the second. But the harmonic progression and the suspensions enact precisely the theological point of yearning. But then he does other little things. So did you notice suddenly when you have the Isaiah bit, it's the two women singing, and there's suspensions on death and gloom that are not resolved. It's fleeting. And then there are moments of absolute pure unison when they sing exactly the same notes and you can't tell them apart on light. The yearning for the dawn. It's like Psalm 130, like the watchman longs for the morning. Now, those words are great and we can pray them, but the sum of the parts, just with very subtle, and it's masterly because it takes real skill to set multiple voices in such a way that you can hear the words. It's never muddy. He's an inheritor of Tallis in some ways. I'm just thinking what I might do. I'll tell you what, okay. I'm obsessed with the band U2. And I couldn't really indulge a whole weekend without playing some. No, it's not indulge, it's just correct. So, my work with Langham Partnership, I was Europe and Caribbean Director for 10 years. I worked with Langham for 22 years until December. So amazing privilege, and I'm so grateful for the fact that I have dear friends in so many places around the world. But just for the way our team worked, I had a small team of sort of 7 or 8 people, but for whatever reason, we could never really find somebody who would join the team to cover Eastern Europe. So I would mainly do Eastern Europe a lot. That's why I still do stuff in Ukraine and so on. But one of the places I've been to a lot is the Balkans, former Yugoslavia, so the countries that split up in the 90s from the Balkans War. And my number 2 on my team was a guy called Slavko, who was a pastor in Sarajevo, capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and is a dear friend. And I went to do some teaching in Sarajevo many times. Now, basically, Sarajevo, the former Yugoslavia, is a beautiful landscape, but it's very rugged and it's mountainous, it's difficult, it's a hard place to live, but it's fertile as well. So, all these sort of paradoxes. But Sarajevo itself is built in a valley, a kind of V shape. And you've got mountains on 2 sides. And the third side of the triangle, if you like, is where the airport is. Now, in the 90s, when the whole thing it blew up, you had a city under siege for 3.5 years. And Serb forces were in the mountains on 2 sides. And basically, they did a deal with the UN, and it's very easy to knock the UN, and people seem to knock the UN a lot these days. And there's no question that this was a deeply compromised decision, and yet, thinking about it, what else would you do? Basically, they did a deal with the UN that the UN would hold the airport in order to fly in and out, humanitarian stuff and blah, blah, blah. But basically, the deal that they did And it was the only way the Serbs would agree to it was that basically they wouldn't allow people in the city out. So the dark irony is that the UN peacekeeping force effectively became jailer as well. And so you had a city, a modern European city, with all the sort of things you might associate it with that, undergoing siege warfare that we thought went out of date in the Middle Ages. For 3.5 years, people couldn't get in or out. There was one tunnel that you can go and visit now that's 1 meter by 1 meter, and basically through this tunnel they brought everything in and out. Petrol, food, weapons. The Serbs never found it, and it went under the airport. But the Bosnian militia controlled it, and they would not let the city leave, because if everybody left, then actually the Serbs would win. Well, in the 90s, U2 was touring, and it was the European leg of their tour, and sort of long story short, they got to know somebody who was an American journalist living inside the city, and he sort of blagged his way into meeting Bono, and in the end, what they started doing is that they had a kind of Sarajevo TV on stage wherever U2 was playing, and for about 10 or 15 minutes, Bono from the stage would talk to somebody in the city about what was going on and what it was like. And one of the most iconic things that happened is, as a way of trying to hold on to normality, is that they had a beauty contest in the city, Miss Sarajevo, 1994 or whatever it was. And so Bono writes a song called Miss Sarajevo, and it's one of the songs he's proudest of, and rightly so. And he did it weirdly with Pavarotti. So there's a bit for Pavarotti in Italian in the middle. Well, you know, obviously that's what you're going to do. But a few years ago, I was giving a talk in Sarajevo, and I was able to play this video in Sarajevo. Many of the folks there hadn't seen it before. Some of them had lived through the siege. So this is the official video, and the reason I wanted to play it, because I think there's a generosity here, a hospitality here, to a city that was known as the Jerusalem of the North, because the Bosniaks are Muslim, the Croats are Catholic, the Serbs are Orthodox, with all the generalizations, labeling, and presumptions that those labels imply, and you know, human nature does it everywhere. But this was a city that for centuries had lived in peace with all these different peoples. It was a real melting pot. And the main street today, you can see a synagogue, a mosque, and 2 cathedrals on the same street. But for 3.5 years, they're trying to kill each other. And there's this beauty contest. I have a kind of slightly uncomfortable relationship with the idea of beauty contests and all this sort of stuff. But this one, well. It was a charity concert that Pavarotti ran. He had a charity called War Child, and this was a fundraiser. And then the footage you see in the city was taken by this journalist, and it's interspersed.
Is there time for high street shopping to find the right dress to wear. Here she comes. Ooh, it's turn around. Here she comes to take her crown. Is there a time to run for cover? A time for kiss and tell? Is there a time for different colors, different names you find it hard to spell? Is there a time for first communion? A time for E17? Is there a time to turn to Mecca? Is there time to be a beauty queen? Here she comes. Ooh, beauty plays the clown. Here she comes. Surreal in her crown. Christmas trees. Is there a time for laying tables and the night is set to freeze?
Do you see the banner they hold up? Don't let them kill us. One of the things that always strikes me if you go to Sarajevo today, they have on the pavements all through the centre of town what they call Sarajevo roses. And in the floor, in the roads, pavements, there are still shrapnel, the signs of shrapnel. And they've painted them red, and each one signifies a civilian who was killed. And what you don't realize at the beginning of the film is the reason they're running. And it's because all the way along this V-shaped valley are snipers picking people off as they go to buy bread in the morning. Can you imagine? 3.5 years of that. And the reason this really affects me now is this is happening in Ukraine today. And it's happening in Gaza. And I don't know what to do with that sometimes, but sometimes you just have to express it. And, you will have things in your own context that, I'm not qualified to speak into, but you can. And this is the extraordinary thing, that actually different art, different media, different languages of art can do things that just raw reportage cannot. So I mentioned yesterday that great C.S. Lewis line about the start of friendship. Friendship begins when you say to somebody, "What, you two? I thought I was the only one." So I played this video to some friends in Kyiv just 3 weeks ago. A different war, a different time, a different generation. Some people hadn't been born then. I vividly remember it. But the context actually being different was irrelevant. I'll shut up. Does anyone want to ask a quick question before we have a break? Or you're probably completely bludgeoned into silence and you can't take anything more, in which case that's absolutely fine. Or come and grab me over the weekend. I think bludgeoned is the word. Great, let's cut it out. Right, good, bye.